Good evening and welcome to Slate School and our discussion entitled A Conversation with Richard Gerver about the Power of Transforming Education. Slate School is committed to excellence in education, and we are delighted to present the Education Idea Lab, which is a unique virtual series that is free and open to the public. This thought-leading event convenes leaders and change makers and participants from all sectors of education and innovation. Thank you for joining us. We are thrilled to have all of you with us. My name is Julie Mountcastle, and I'm head of school at Slate School. So I'll briefly introduce you to Slate School, and then we're going to hear from our remarkable guest. Slate School is an independent 501c3 nonprofit elementary school where education is focused on cultivating creativity, fostering ingenuity, and inspiring a deep passion for lifelong learning. So at Slate School, we have formed a community that is constantly striving to improve practice, to create meaningful educational experiences for learners of all ages, and honestly, to change the landscape of education. Slate School convenes experts for important, authentic conversations about education, and these online dialogues, just like today's, are free and open to the public. So we're eager to get started, but I do want to mention that we again have viewers joining us from 6 continents. And here's why. Richard Gerver is an innovator, an educator, and advisor to the UK government. He is profiled in Sir Ken Robinson's book, The Element, How Finding Your Passion Changes Everything, as the exemplar of Sir Ken's work on talent and human potential. Richard is a former school principal, and he charted this story in his first book, now a second edition, called Creating Tomorrow's Schools Today, which is an international bestseller with a foreword by Sir Ken Robinson. His other international best-selling book is called Change, Learn to Love It, Learn to Lead It. He has been named UK Business Speaker of the Year twice. He has spoken both at TED and RSA events. He works with organizations at the forefront of global innovation and excellence, and we are thrilled to have him for this conversation tonight. And I would also hold up these 2 books because we have these 2, Richard.
Oh, Julie, I should hire you as my agent. That was amazing. Thank you so much. Honestly, good night, everybody. Julie's work is done here now.
Oh, Richard, thank you so much. I know it's late at night there, and I'm glad you've got the coffee going.
That's an absolute pleasure. It's such a joy to be with you all. Thank you for having me, Julie.
Oh, it's our pleasure. We're so excited to have you. And I want to just get right into it. And I wish everybody could have heard, because we were having just a Jim Dandy conversation before this even started. Well, before I was searching on how to get to Facebook, but but we were just really I'm just excited for everyone to hear you. So I'm just gonna get started, and I'm kind of gonna jump in the middle.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you a question that you asked in your book, Education Manifesto for Change. You raise a lot of important questions, but one of them I'm particularly interested in. You ask, have we, in an effort to drive progress, standardized too heavily and to an extent dehumanized, really, a highly personal and human experience? I think you're nodding, and I agree. I think the answer to the question is fairly obvious, but the big thing is, what's the solution? What are we going to do about that?
It's a great question, Julie. Not because I asked it, but it's a great one to raise. Honestly, that sounded very egotistical. That's a great question. I think it's the heart of everything. And I think what's really important is that we understand why that's the trap that we've fallen into, in order to help us understand, firstly, the challenge we face, why we've done it, and how then we can pull ourselves away from it. So the first thing to say, really, is that, education, when mass education was first created in civilized society, it was created, after the first iteration, which was created by the church to spread Christianity and religion. The first mass education system, of course, was really designed in countries like the US and the UK and across Europe and the developing world as it was then, to fire the Industrial Revolution. So the entire system was predicated very much on the kind of Taylorist model of efficiency, which really was the blueprint for modern industrialization, right? So the Taylorist model is basically, if you focus on efficiency, you increase productivity. If you increase productivity, you increase profit. If you increase profit and you invest that back in further efficiency, you create the perfect cycle of industrial thinking or industrial design. And of course, it's no great surprise that education, therefore, was designed to work in exactly the same way. The problem is that education is still working on that cycle. If you think about it, to anyone who works in education listening, that'll sound really familiar, right? The idea is we focus on efficiency in order to improve productivity, i.e. test scores, etc., and we create this model. And in a way, the great challenge, I think, over the last 40 or 50 years, as successive people and teachers and educators and school leaders and administrators have been saying, you know, we need to transform the education system. And during that same period, we've seen amazing leaps forward in human understanding around brain science and cognition. You know, we've seen unbelievable leaps forward, of course, in technology, mirroring what's been going on in the outside world. So there's been incredible catalysts for real conversations about evolution. But the problem is, what we do with that is we always go, okay, but great, how do we use that to do what we've always done more efficiently? And that's the trap we've always found ourselves in. So, you know, policy and assessment design and school design is still it's, how can I explain it? Let's imagine you take one of the world's most innovative chefs, right? And you say to that chef, we want you to create something staggering and new and innovative, and you know, we want it to be extraordinary. And the chef goes, brilliant. And then just as she's walking away to go and create something masterful, you call her back and you say, oh, just before you go, one thing. And she comes back, she goes, yes. And you say to her, whatever you create has to look like and taste just like this chocolate cake, right? And that's the trap, because of course, what do? You go and use the ingredients you know how to use to make the perfect chocolate cake. And that's partly the problem, right? So in an effort, the mistake we've made is to believe that in order to improve education, you have to improve test scores. You know, the world is dominated at policy level by the OECD's PISA league tables, where internationally, year on year, we're told we're useless at teaching literacy and numeracy and all the rest of it. So what do? We put all our time, all our effort, all our resource into making the best chocolate cake we can, rather than stepping away and saying, actually, is there another way? And that, I think, is the key. As teachers, what we need to do is have more confidence in what we know about our kids, our students, have more confidence in the passion we have for creating three-dimensional young people. And rather than waiting for policymakers and people at the top to give us permission, it's to start small. I mean, you know, you've already mentioned him tonight. My mentor, and God rest his soul, I miss him every day, Ken. You know, we used to talk about this all the time. And one of the great challenges Ken faced throughout his career was people perceived him to be the knight on the white horse in the shining armor, right? Ready to lead the revolution. And the truth is, the revolution doesn't start at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning when somebody fires the starting pistol, right? It starts in each and every one of our classrooms. And we have more power and control in those classrooms than we believe. And really what we need to do is to say, okay, even if it's just for a short period of time every day, every week within my timetable, every semester, I am going to do what I passionately believe in. And I'm going to see the kind of ripples of change that can make. And I'm not going to spend that hour, that day, that week focusing on standardizing what we've always standardized, and I'm not going to focus on efficiency. I'm just going to take a step out, and I'm going to do something with my students that pushes the boundaries, that develops them as individuals, that gives them the opportunity to make their hearts beat faster. Because so much of what we need to do, I think, comes down to us as a profession growing our self-belief and confidence. You know, as a profession, what we've seen in the last year alone has been truly remarkable. You know, teachers, educators, administrators have performed nothing short of miraculous transformation in the last year. And why? Because we get up every morning passionately caring about our students. And so we have proved to ourselves what we're capable of. And now what we need to do is just take a little bit of that self-confidence and belief, galvanize it and use it. And remember that revolutions start in coffee shops, right? They start over a cup of coffee between two like-minded individuals who then share that with more friends and more colleagues, and that galvanizes a movement. And that's what we need to be better at. We need to just start with a small step, share it with people we know, It's why things like these conversations are so important, Julie, because it's a way to galvanize like-minded people all over the world, 6 continents, right? To share practice, to share self-belief, share confidence. And if nothing else, tomorrow go back into their classroom and just for a few minutes with their students, take a step away from this obsession with Taylorist efficiency and say, I'm just going to try something different.
Beautiful. Beautiful. You know, I think you really touched on this, but I think we rely on efficiency and the idea of efficiency as a way to sort of guarantee a lot of the basics in the classroom. I'm checking off this box, I'm checking off that box. That means this is going to go fine and this is going to go fine. And I think one of the areas where that's especially true, especially for young teachers, is with, the class that loves to be taught classroom management.
Yeah.
Right. So there's classroom management and there's boxed curricula all over the place for do this, so you can have them do that. And you approach it from a totally different point of view. And I think it's right in line with what you were just talking about. You basically say that the single most important element in any approach to discipline in a classroom is love. It's love.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what you mean by that?
Absolutely. And I think it's founded out of my career. You know, as you were saying, Judy, we were talking beforehand, and just to let people have a little bit of context of my actual background as an educator, because it's something I want people to know. I'm not sat here trying to preach at people from some kind of high, vantage point or some unrealistic privileged position. I was privileged enough to spend nearly 20 years in teaching and then in administration in the latter part of those 20 years, and always taught in schools of areas of high levels of social deprivation and challenge. And one of the things that was always really, really important to me was, a lot of my students would come into school every day. And I mean, just to be honest, for some of them, it was a miracle they were even there. They were often the carers for a parent who was disabled or, God forbid, on drugs or an alcoholic, or, they were a child in an abusive family, or they were getting 2 or 3 toddlers up and ready every day before coming into my classroom, or a whole range of other things those remarkable young people had been involved in. And the one thing that school gives so many of our kids is a sense of stability, a sense of belonging, a sense of confidence and security and safety. And why do kids love school? Kids love school because of that. It makes them feel safe. It makes them feel part of something important. And so, for me, the greatest privilege and joy as a young teacher, and that's where I think I learned this, was the realization that if you earned the trust and respect of the students you taught, they would love you and do anything they could for you, right? In every way, they would give it back to you 100 times magnified. And I think what's really, really important for me about behavior, and of course, everyone on this evening will know this, is that every child behaves the way they do for a whole variety of different reasons, right? There is no one answer. Some kids bully. And the point is, we have to understand why they bully. Some kids misbehave and disrupt, and the key is to understand why. So, you know, the love for me isn't something about being soft and soapy. It's not about just it's not about unicorns and rainbows. The love is about actually having the respect and desire to understand what makes each of those children tick, to really take the space and time to understand what makes each of those kids tick. Because, you know, to me, in essence, that's the craft of what separates great teachers from okay teachers. Because great teachers truly understand each and every one of their students. They are passionate about each and every one of their students, and they find a way to craft what those students need to know in a way that resonates for each and every one of those students. And that's the definition of love. I remember back in the turn of the millennium, discovering a remarkable book written by two UK professors of education, Catherine Burke and Ian Grosvenor. And it was a book called The School I'd Like. And actually, it was a revisitation of a book I think that was originally published in the US, actually in the late 60s, which a book of the same name. And basically what they did, these two professors, was they went around the UK interviewing young people, students between the ages of 3 and 18. And they basically asked them one fundamental question. And the one fundamental question they asked them was, what would your ideal school be like? And the book is wonderful because it's broken down into chapters around curriculum, around rules and behavior, even school meals and whether there should be uniform. I mean, it's just the most beautiful book, you know, and actually, I think probably the most powerful book any teacher can read because it's written by our consumers, basically, right? And there was one quote in that book. I remember when I read it for the first time, I think it was the most powerful, most provocative thing I'd ever heard anyone challenge me with as a teacher. And it came from a young woman who at the time she was interviewed was 16. I think her name was Kirsty. And I definitely know, you know, though they didn't disclose her exact location or name, she came from an area of reasonable social deprivation and challenge. And she said this: in my ideal school, we will no longer be treated like a herd of an identical wild animal waiting to be civilized for the outside world. You'll realize and respect that it's my world too. And I tell you what, my goodness me, I was just stepping into my principal's job at that time. And that was the most powerful reference point for me. And I think it's absolutely what makes the most skilled, passionate teachers the most skilled, passionate teachers. The young people in their care never leave their classroom feeling like one member of a herd of an identical wild animal. And I suppose in essence, that's what I mean by love.
Wow. You gave us a lot to chew on there, but I've got something I want to ask you. So you mentioned the child that's basically working a full-time job at home, taking care of somebody, taking care of siblings, taking care of the house, taking care of whatever needs to be taken care of. I feel like we have to find a way to make that work, that learning that's happening there, because that, you know, we're never not learning. That child is doing something way above their pay grade. They're learning more things in those hours when they're doing the things that are being asked of them well beyond what should be asked of them. How do we find ways to make that value transparent? Because, you know, that's not a kid who's going to be able to do an internship in their junior year. That's not the kid that's going to be able to, you know, even have a part-time job, because they have a full-time job. How do we make that transparent for the world? How do we do that? Because we'll never be equal until we do.
No, and you know what, again, I think that's a really powerful question, Julie. And I think the first thing to say, just as an observation of that, is another thing I often say when I look back on my career in education, is that what I've realized over the more recent years is that actually my students taught me far more than ever I taught them, and particularly about how to be a human being. You know, some of their demonstrations of courage, of love, of trust, of bounce back ability, of learnacy, of resilience, all of those things, remarkable things. Particularly, you know, I came from a privileged middle class background, and what some of those kids taught me about love, compassion, and all of those things is truly amazing. And I think the really important thing for us to do as educators is to value that package. It's to value what those young people bring to school every day. And that's partly to do with what we hold to be important, right? Because actually, you know, those young people are remarkable future leaders. Those young people are not just future caregivers, but they're future leaders. They're human. You know, one of the things the world is crying out for now, perhaps more than ever in modern history, is compassionate leadership. It's skilled human leadership. And these people demonstrate it every single day. I remember once getting into a conversation, quite a heated conversation. In fact, it was the last conversation I was invited to with the former British Prime Minister, Tony Blair. Looking back on it now, I realized maybe it was, you know, that was my mistake. It was the last time he invited me to a meeting. And I was arguing that actually, when you think about kids that get involved in gangs, right, which is a massive, and by the way, I'm not diminishing the challenge or the evil of what those things constitute. What I said to him was, we need to understand why it is young people go into those gangs. And actually what we need to realize is there is immensely skilled leadership in the leaders of the hierarchies of those youth gangs. And we need to start to say to ourselves, what if we could identify those traits in young people aged 5, 6 years of age? You know, the ability to galvanize a group of people, to bring people together, to understand people's weaknesses and strengths, to be able to utilize those things. But what if we could find those strengths and those characteristics and then deploy them in really constructive, productive ways, so that we gave them an education which fired and developed those qualities in those young people? You know, in essence, what it comes down to, Julie, is what we've said a lot already this evening. And that is the commitment to truly understanding what makes each of those children tick. I mean, I remember I had a kid in one of my early classes who frankly was a nightmare. You know, we've all got to be honest here as teachers. We all have them, right? We all have those kids, and they're the hardest work. And I had this boy in my class, and he was tough. He was really tough. And of course, the reason he was tough and abrasive and defensive was actually he found learning really hard, and he felt threatened in a classroom. So he was fight and flight stuff, right? He would fight back before he was put in a position where his vulnerability was exposed. And I remember one day just calling him to come and see me when the rest of the class had gone. And I said to him, I said, look, what makes your heart beat? For what do you do outside of school? And something remarkable happened. His eyes lit up. And I don't know if you have this in the US in the same way that we do in the north of England, right? But he kept and trained racing pigeons. So like bird racing, right? Which is a big thing in the north of England, racing pigeons. It's a very skilled thing. You know, they race pigeons against each other. They set them off from a destination. The first one to get home wins, right? It's an amazing skill. So this was a 9-year-old child. He said, well, actually, I keep and train and race pigeons. And what was really interesting, irrespective of what it was he did, was the minute he started telling me this really difficult, abrasive kid, his eyes lit up, right? I mean, really lit up. And and I was like, well, where would you even begin? I don't know. And he would, woof, he was off, right? Anyway, at the end of the conversation, I said, look, I've had an idea. Because the school was in the community. So he only lived maybe 2-3 minutes from the school. I said, what if next week we organized to bring the class down to your coop where you keep your pigeons? Would you be prepared to show them your pigeons and tell them about what you do? And he said, yeah, of course I would. no problem. And so we walked the kids over the following week to where he kept his pigeons. Well, you've never seen anything like it. The kids were captivated. He was in charge. He became a leader. You could see him grow. And what was really interesting was from that day on, when he was back in the classroom, he was happy to show his vulnerability. He didn't understand math, or he didn't understand a concept in literacy, because he knew the other kids knew he had something special about him. And I think that's really, really important for all of these kids. And it's really important that we value it, we respect it, we celebrate it. And because if we're able to do that and make these kids feel that they are of value and of purpose, then of course they're more confident allowing themselves to step into the areas that make them nervy rather than immediately slipping into protection mode.
That's brilliant. And I have to say, we see it here in a different way, but it is the light in the eyes. And it's similar in project-based learning, as I'm sure you know. If you get to pick the project you're going to study, you become the expert on that, and you're the expert on that forever.
Yeah.
And so it is, if you know everything about owls, it's okay not to be able to use the box method right now in multiplication. Right? Because somebody's going to come to you with a question about what you know, and the world feels a lot kinder. I'm thrilled to hear you talk about that. It kind of teased me up for this question about the Grangeton project.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if you talk a little bit about it and describe what you did, because I think it is like the modern example of John Dewey. I think it's exactly the micro community. And I just wish you'd talk about it, tell us how it started.
Sure.
and what you gained from it, what the kids gained.
So this was the job. So let a bit of context for people. So this was the job I took as a principal. I was very young, actually, to be given a principal's job. And I have to be honest with people, this was not because I was some kind of shining superstar or prodigy in education. So I became a principal at 31 years old. Love is a really recurring theme in my professional, obviously personal life, but professional life. I wasn't looking to be a school principal, actually. And at the time I was working for the local government, designing programs to remotivate, specifically to remotivate or to motivate demotivated boys in reading and writing. And I came across this school, Grange, because it was one of the schools we wanted to get involved in the program. Anyway, I walked in, try and cut a very long story short. There'd not been a substantive school principal for 18 months. There'd been 8 school principals in 10 years. The school had been through a cycle of a 10-year steep decline. And I just fell in love. I can't describe to you why. On the day, the first time I went in there, I fell in love with the place. It was something to do with the spirit and soul of like some people when they're looking for real estate, right? You can see 10 properties that on paper all look the same, but you walk into one and you can imagine Christmas there. And that's the tipping point, right? And that kind of happened to me at this school. So I applied for the job and got it. And the only reason I got it, and this is true, was because it turns out, and I only found this afterwards, once I'd signed my contract, the school was so bad, the government had slated it for closure because they didn't think it was salvageable. And it turns out the only person in the education community in the area that didn't know that was me. And as a result, I was the only applicant. So I didn't get the job because I was great. I got the job because I was breathing, right? Which is, it dents your ego after you get like a big hyper, but anyway, I got over that quickly. The point was the school was in an area of social deprivation. And it was in one of these areas, and we have these pockets of places all over the world, right? It was a micro community in itself. The area, it was a place right in the heart of the UK called Long Eaton, between 2 big cities, Derby and Nottingham, which is more famous, Nottingham, Robin Hood. And it was a very insular community. So it was a place where nobody ever left, and if you ever moved in, you were never considered a local because you weren't born there, right? So very insular, very insular thinking. And that was partly the problem. There was a deprivation of aspiration because it was a very kind of self-fulfilling diminishing returns kind of area where industry had left. It used to be in the upholstery business. That was its kind of core. And that had gone long years before the jobs had fled to other parts of the world. So it was a very declining community. Nothing ever happened. Nobody arrived, nobody left. And I went in there, and I've always been passionate, interestingly enough, about early years education. I often get asked, where are the best models of learning I've ever seen? And people expect me to talk about the highfalutin schools or the top universities. And I always say the same thing to them. Go visit the best run early years unit in your community and you'll find the best models of education, right? Because learning is so experiential, so contextual, so in the moment. Kids feel it, get their hands dirty. It changes everything. So I went into this school. And I really had it was like a blank canvas. It was like a kid in a sweet shop, right? Because nobody was going to get in the way because everybody had pulled out thinking the school was going to be shut down. And I thought, right, what are the two factors here? So the first thing is my passion for experiential and contextual learning. And the second was, so the people here understand community, because like a lot of socially deprived communities, those people would die for each other, literally, right? So they got this sense of supporting one another. So I thought, okay, how can I use that essence rather than saying everything you're doing and overlaying my middle class principles on these people, saying, how can I use their essence and use it to help them turn outwards? So actually we raise their aspiration and sense of value. And I thought, well, okay, they get community. So let's recreate a community within the school. But let's add in things that the community they live in doesn't necessarily have, right? So we're using the essence, and we're using experiential and contextual techniques to really fire the imaginations of these children. So basically what we set about doing, Julie, was building a town within a town. And we said, okay, so what does every town have? Well, every town has a political system. So we need a system of representation, of local democracy. So we're going to have a mayor, and we're going to have a town council, and they're going to be elected, and they're from the pupil body. I'll come back to how we did it in a minute. And then we said, okay, what else do we need in our town? Well, we need shops and we need cafes. And let's add in a museum, because the area we were in, Long Eaton, didn't have a museum. So let's put a museum in there too. And let's also give them their own television station and radio station, right? Because those kids would never get the chance to experience working in those kinds of organizations, right? And then we said, okay, how do we make it authentic? Well, we've got teachers, but those teachers aren't necessarily experts in any of those fields. So let's go into the wider community and get experts from those professions and industries to come and teach our kids how to run those businesses and enterprises and systems. So the BBC came and taught our kids how to create a television station and a radio station, right? A national museum came and taught our kids how to set up and run and curate a museum. We got local restaurants and cafes to come and teach the kids about how to set up a cafe. And we had local retail business, all these things, right? Real experts. And the political system, which was extraordinary, we actually got our local member of the British Parliament to teach our kids about representation and democracy. And they went and spent time down in Westminster at the home of British democracy, meeting the Prime Minister, members of Parliament, learning about civic responsibility and democracy and representation. So there was really rich authenticity. And by the way, remember, this was an elementary school. And in the UK, our kids were between 3 and 11 years of age. So within 6 months, they were running their own TV station, 3 to 11-year-olds. They were running their own radio station. They had their own political system. They were running their own cafes, shops, museums, the whole works, right? And it had a profound impact on the community, because what was really interesting was we didn't set out in that first iteration to dramatically transform our academic results. We just wanted to increase participation and sense of value. But the really remarkable part of that story, Julie, was our academic results doubled inside of 18 months of starting that program. Because of course, suddenly kids could see why they were learning. We were raising their aspirations, their sense of value and place. They started to dream, and then they started to change the dreams into something tangible and real. And just to give you one extraordinary exemplar of that story, our first mayor, because the kids got to select their own candidates and then they'd run their campaigns and the kids would then vote. And one of the teachers, there was a girl who was in the final year. She was 10 years old in one of the top classes. And she was what I would call one of those invisible kids. She was a really good kid, right? But she just got her head down, lurked in the shadows, did what she was asked, never came to the attention of a busy teacher, and would frankly have drifted through her whole school career just quietly, shyly getting on and doing what she was asked, right? But her teacher knew through conversations that this girl was passionate about things like the environment and social justice as a 10-year-old. And so we convinced her to stand for the position of mayor. And she romped it. She won, I think, 70-something% of the popular vote, became our first mayor, this quiet, shy girl. And during that year, she just exploded, right? You saw her change. Now, what's really interesting was just a few years ago, I caught up with somebody who tracked her story. Anyway, she'd gone on into her secondary school education and became the first representative for the European Youth Parliament from that region. She then went to study at the London School of Economics, which is kind of a finishing school for our politicians and actually politicians all over the world. And she studied politics, philosophy, and economics, and is now working in the European Parliament, right? This is a shy girl that probably would have ended up going through her education and getting a job as a checkout person in a local supermarket, right? And so that is the power of the program. I didn't create it, the community created it. But yeah, in short, that's the Grangeton project.
Wow. Well, that was even better than I hoped it would be. I wonder about what words we can give administrators to give them the confidence to find their own Grangeton project, because I doubt anybody else's would look like that one, nor they shouldn't really.
No,
right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's funny, Julie, I don't talk about it very much anymore because what happened, education's as fickle as the fashion industry, right? Mm-hmm. There's always a new little black dress or a new cut of a suit or whatever. And of course, for a couple of years after I left Grange, you can imagine actually all over the world, Grange became people were fascinated by the Grangeton model. And what was really worrying was I was getting feedback over the next few years from people going, well, we tried it and it didn't work. And I went, well, of course it didn't work, because it was founded on a system unique to our community, right? The principles are it's the process that matters, not the model. And all too often in education, I think we try to seize on silver bullets. It's like the whole obsession with Finland, because for a while Finland was hot in the international. So we all went to Finland and we need to do what the Finnish do. Well, you can't, because the Finnish system is unique to the culture, right, and society within Finland. So the really important thing for me, first of all, to say to administrators and principals is, first of all, just have the confidence in the fact your community, and your community better than anybody else. And the first thing to say is not to be blindsided or swept away by somebody else's silver bullet or somebody else telling you what to do. But it's actually to sit down with your community and go, right, what makes us unique? What makes our kids unique? And what do we want our kids to be when they leave our school and our system? And then to build little pockets, because the thing with the Grangeton project was, it wasn't finished and bright and shiny on day one. It started as an extracurricular program, and it took on a momentum and life of its own, right? And when I talk about it now, it sounds all bright and shiny and perfect and finished, but it took a lot of ups and downs and heartache and mistakes and learning and moments. and reflection and rebuilding and redesigning. And of course, it continued to evolve over the 7 years I was at the school, and that story continued. So I think it's really important to say to principals, have the courage to say, okay, we're going to start small. We're going to start with a little moment, we'll find space somewhere, not for a whole week, a whole day. We're not going to redesign the curriculum or the timetable. We're just going to start small with a germ of an idea founded on what we believe we know about our community and what we can do to respond to it, and allow it to grow and flourish. Because that's the other thing. We're under so much pressure as educators, as principals, as leaders in our schools all the time to deliver everything yesterday. And the one thing I've learned more importantly than anything around change is change actually, if it's done right, is about cultural shift. And cultural shift takes years, not days, weeks, or even one academic cycle. It takes years. And so we have to just allow these things to grow organically. So have the courage, because you know your community better than ever. You have more skill and ability than even you think you know and you have. Trust yourself. Start with a little germ of an idea and just allow it to grow. You know, one of the things, again, I say about change is in many ways on a daily basis, it should be as imperceptible as the daily growth of your child. And you know what? All parents will know what I mean by that, right? You don't notice the changes in your own child, but when you look at a photograph of them 6 months apart, you go, oh my God, I can't believe how much they've changed. And actually, that's how it should feel. It shouldn't be grandiose. There shouldn't be fanfares. You just start small and allow it to evolve. And of course, the role of a leader is just to hold it to account, scrutinize it, and keep directing it in the right direction. But trust and allow the momentum. And as long as you keep coming back and going, but is this what our kids need? Is this what makes our community unique? That's enough to keep it on track. And that's very much how the Grangeton project grew.
Beautiful. I've got a question from someone out there watching.
Brilliant.
Us. So how does an established educator who has taken time off to raise kids find a way back into education that is not public education? After becoming a mother, I struggle finding a path that makes a difference the way Slate does. Any leads on other career paths?
I mean, look, it's a really great question. And I don't know that I have the experience or skill set to be able to answer that, except to say, you know, the only experience I have is, as I described earlier, the Grange moment, right? I wasn't necessarily looking for a particular job at that time in a particular school. And what I've learned throughout my career is, first of all, to trust your instincts and to have the courage to know the right things out there and not push yourself too. I mean, it depends. It's very easy for me to say because there might not be the economic opportunity. You know, there might be economics involved and this woman needs a job and needs it fast. So I don't want to sound too ethereal about this, but actually the first thing is to trust your instinct. I often think we walk into schools, places, organizations, new opportunities, and we talk ourselves out of it because we use logic too quickly. And actually our instinct is often the right one. You know, I believe a school is like a kind of a relationship, and you know pretty quick if there's an electricity and a magic. That there are schools like Slate out there, and there are more than you would believe. And it's just a case of asking around. And actually a great place to start would be with you, Julie, because you'll know other schools across your community that are doing great things, and to push people in the right direction. I think that's really, really important, but also to know that actually as an educator going back into any school, the key is if you have a principal and leadership team who are open, and you'll know that even if it's a standard school, right? Once you're in your little kingdom, your classroom with your students, you can push the envelope. You can do the things you believe in. So trust yourself, trust your professionalism, trust the fact that actually taking time out to become a mother is not just a gift for you, but my God Almighty, what that transforms the way you see education. I know it. I mean, I can't speak as a mother, but I can as a father. And I know that when my children were born and were young, it gave me a whole new perspective and a whole new toolkit as a teacher too. So you're carrying all of those things into a new job, but just trust yourself as a teacher, wherever you find yourself, when you shut that door, to create a little bit of magic every day for your students. Because even if that's the least you find, you'll still be able to find magic in it.
Well, that's great. I would also say, we think only about teaching in a classroom or in a school, but there are a lot of situations where you can continue to be a teacher. You can do outdoor education. There are a lot of great programs I know around this state and probably many others where you can engage in taking kids on, field trips and hikes and observing nature and all of those things. I find here at Slate School some of the most meaningful teaching I get to do, because I'm actually just sitting there next to them, learning with them. And I think that's a great point. That's a possibility for you too, I hope. And
such a great point. Yeah, I think that's such a great point, Julie. I wish I'd made it. That was such a great point.
So I'm always struck by your optimism, Richard. Like you're just, if I feel like I didn't have the best day as a teacher, I'd want to have a conversation with you, because I think you could help me. Help me out, turn me around on that. But I'm wondering what has you so optimistic right now about education? What's good right now?
I think yeah. I mean, first of all, I think my optimism is born out, and I think this is really important. I had a challenging childhood. I won't go into detail now, but I think that helped me contextualize challenge and life, and it gave me very young a kind of perspective of the fact that there is always light out there, and there's always people worse off. And I think that was true. That was galvanized when I became a teacher and through my experiences that I've described. You start to realize there's always light somewhere, and it's finding the shades of light. There's a wonderful story which I'll mention before I answer the question. A friend of mine, a guy called Sebastian Foucault, who was one of the founders of parkour or free running, described to me how that came about. And he was an immigrant. He was an immigrant from Guadeloupe, went to Paris, France, with his family, his brothers, sisters, mum and dad. And they lived in a really tough slum community north of Paris. And this is parkour for him. Free running isn't a sport. It's a mindset. It's a way of seeing the world. And very quickly to explain, he said, one day as a young child, Richard, I was sat on the doorstep of our big tower block, our big concrete prison, surrounded by other big concrete prisons. He said, and just as a child in a flight of fancy one day, I noticed a shaft of light coming between the space between two of the buildings. And he said, that's how free running parkour was born. He said, because I sat there and lost myself for probably an hour as I imagined I could fly, and I could fly into the space, into the light between the two buildings. And he said, the hour was me as a child on that flight of fancy, imagining what lay beyond. So if I could take the original route, avoid the buildings, get through the space, what other spaces I'd find and what adventures I could go on as I found more and more gaps and more spaces and more light. And for me, as he was describing that for me is the best way to describe the way I frame optimism, right? It's always being able to see the spaces between the buildings. Something else he said the first time we met, which I think was really profound and poetic, and it's a great thing for people to do. He said, the next time you walk through an urban landscape, rather than looking at the architecture and buildings, look at the spaces between the buildings, because the shapes they make are beautiful. And so there's a kind of that's the big thinking, right? And a bit of context. Why am I optimistic now? And by the way, it really annoys me and upsets me. And I don't know if the same narrative is happening in the US, but over here right now, we keep hearing terms because of COVID, for example, of our children being the lost generation. They're damaged beyond repair, lost learning, right? And it drives me mad, because one of the things I think we need to appreciate over the last year is actually for all of us that have managed to survive. And I'm not diminishing the unbelievable challenge and loss and hurt and, in all kinds of ways, forget the lives that have been lost, but the jobs and the careers and the opportunity, the relationship, all of it has been horrific. But the one thing we need to remember is our kids have lived through that and they've survived. They have survived the greatest threat to humanity in modern times, right? Which means they have got resilience in their locker they don't even know they've got, which is actually going to make them a more fired up, powerful, and confident generation. I remember when I was a young child, and I come from a Jewish background, I had great grandparents and relatives of that generation and grandparents who had the tattoos of concentration camps on their arms, right? But I remember looking back, first of all, they were unbelievably entrepreneurial. The family I had that survived and moved to the UK set up businesses, created opportunities. They were extraordinary. They had courage and depth of resilience and innovative qualities that we never, we could only hope to possess. And I believe our kids will possess the same. And actually, the really exciting challenge as educators is to help mold that, because the raw material's there. The second thing I'd say is this, that we have lived through, forget even before COVID, I think we have lived through an increasingly dark period in human history, where there's been a rise in populism and hatred and division in so many places around the world, whether it's been, things like Brexit or the rise of the extreme right or the extreme left or whatever it is, right? We've seen unbelievable division and a period of really profound human darkness. But when you look at human history, what you realize is that every period of human darkness, every period of darkness in history is followed by a renaissance, an explosion in light and hope and creation and innovation and culture and science. And again, one of the great privileges I think I hold dear is as educators, and I said this to my daughter recently. My daughter now is in her third year as a teacher, so the family business continues through her. And I remember saying to her a while back, I said, I envy you, because you are about to make the difference and lead the next generation, not just into hope and light, but actually you're about to educate them as they take on the next great human renaissance. And we may be long gone by the time the stories are told, but we need to remember that our legacy will be as the educators of the leaders of the next great human renaissance. So I guess that's why I'm optimistic, Julie, and I passionately believe now is the greatest time to be an educator and the greatest privilege to be able to work with that generation.
Awesome. I want to close with a question that might be longer than we really have time for, but I don't really care because that's just how I am. But I want to read a quote from one of your books that I think is just like a really, really beautiful description of the wonder of childhood. And I think because I've read this quote, I think that everybody should read this quote. So I'm going to make sure they've at least heard it. Maybe they'll go buy your book. So it's in the book Simple Thinking. And I actually really love that book because I felt like you took all of the things that you know as an educator and you made them relevant for people in every walk of life. It wasn't just about education. It was about all of us. So I love that book.
Thank you.
So you say, children go to bed at night, for the most part, exhausted, because they have spent the day actively experiencing everything they can. Success doesn't come from material gain, but from experiences and the memories those experiences have created minute by minute. Through their actions and interactions, children learn about relationships and what it takes to like and be liked. From a very young age, they learn the importance of looking out for others. They have basic, uncomplicated needs. They want to be fed, loved, stimulated, and secure. And every day, when they wake, they want to go again, taking risks, having adventures, smiling, crying, and provoking the same in others. They start to gain an awareness of their own strengths and weaknesses and those of others, but they don't let that awareness get in their way. They learn to collaborate, to play, and to learn. And I feel like as educators, as humans, we need to be sharing the value of that with our children. We need to be saying to them, this work that you're doing is so important, and it's not just important to you, it's important to me because it reminds me that this is who I'm supposed to be. I love this quote. Can you tell me how it came up for you? What were
Oh
you?
my goodness. Oh God. It's so many things, Julie. I think the fascination started way back when I was training to be a teacher. And I remember a lecturer, we had a pedagogical lecturer. She was amazing, actually. She was one of those real kind of wizened old, wise, amazing sage-like people that you very rarely come across anymore. She was honestly extraordinary. There's a wonderful quote, just as an aside, sorry, I heard recently, which I love, which was, every time an old person dies, a library burns down. Isn't that beautiful? And I just think sometimes we just don't appreciate the wisdom of age and experience enough. Anyway, she was one of that. She should have retired years before. That's why I mention it. But she was so extraordinary. And I remember her saying at one point, she didn't used to have a kind of program. We wouldn't sit there and be lectured. She'd just kind of talk, off the top. She'd reminisce, and it was magical. And I remember once, and I don't know where, I've never been able to find the research, but I love the essence of what she said. And this was the point. I remember her saying in one lecture, she said, we learn somewhere between 70 and 75% of everything we learn in our lifetime before we're 5 years old, right? And I thought, and ever since then, that's captivated me. And it's, even if you can't percentage, I love the essence, because of course, that, what do most of us learn to walk and talk. We learn to understand vocal intonation, facial expression, body language. We learn to make sense of the sensory world around us, right? And all of that happens before we're 5, which is remarkable, right? So that was the first thing. The second was, as I reflected on my career as an educator and during my time as a teacher, I remember on many occasions thinking to myself, we learn nothing new by getting something right. We only ever learn something new from the point of a mistake or the realization that we don't know something or we can't do something. Yet the problem is, and the two quotes are connected, right? The wisdom and that.
Yes.
Because what we do is we tell kids from a relatively young age that in order to prove they're clever, in order to prove that they're smart and all those things, to be successful, you have to be correct. And we reward those kids that get everything right, right? And so what happens is quite profound, because as we get older, we start to become more and more terrified of exposing weakness, of what we don't know, of what we can't understand or don't understand, of things that make us feel uncomfortable because of it. And so a bit like, an eye in the light, we close down the aperture the older we get, because we become more and more protectionist about our fragility. And for me, so much of that then is the way we protect ourselves. And the essence of part of the book, Simple Thinking, was the tragedy is we then arrive at a place where we think we have to overcomplicate everything in order to evidence and prove that we're actually quite smart, right? So we start talking garbage and we start doing stuff in languages nobody else understands. I tell a story. In fact, it's the opening story in Simple Thinking. I hope this is okay if I just ramble for a minute or two. Oh. The opening story in Simple Thinking was about me queuing outside the world's first Starbucks in Seattle. And feeling I had to do it so I could take Instagram pictures or whatever to be cool in the eyes of my teenage, as she was then, my teenage daughter. And I remember, and the problem is, you see, I drink coffee really simple. I just have it black, right? That's it. So I'm stood outside the world's first Starbucks. I don't know if anyone else on this has been there, opposite Pike's Place Market. And I'm queuing, right? And the queue goes back for nearly 1 kilometer. Everyone else obviously had the same idea. And I was quite excited. And then I got to near the front of the queue, just outside the door. and I heard what was going on inside, and it was like urban poetry, right? Because the people inside weren't ordering, from what I could understand, coffee. They were ordering 15 things they wanted done to a hot cup of liquid, right? They wanted a breve half and half, peppermint pump, caramel macchiato, just sprinkles, no sugar. What I just get, and then everyone was finished, like a full stop at the end of each order was, and make it extra hot, right? At which point everybody else in the queue and the baristas, I mean, don't even get me started on what extra hot means in a hot cup of coffee. But anyway, and then the baristas were like whooping. It was like, yeah, man, great order. And I was thinking, in a minute, I'm going to walk in there and I'm going to say, can I just have a cup of coffee, please, black, in a cup like this size? And I could feel everyone's disappointment. And it's kind of, I ran away. I didn't go in the end. I just bottled it. But the point was, that's what happens, right? As we get older, we become so scared of being judged, of being seen as stupid because we don't know, we don't understand, we overcomplicate and overcomplicate and overcomplicate. And I think the essence of that quote is, we need to remember that kids under 5 are remarkable, not just because they're children, that actually some of that innocence, some of that incredible magic, some of that authenticity is what we all need to reconnect with if we're to truly find success and happiness in our lives, and stop pursuing the complex, and stop believing the older we get, the more logical we have to be, the more right we have to be, the more protectionist of our self-esteem we have to be. You know, I'm yet to meet an 18-month-old kid who's undergoing therapy because they can't deal with the rate of change and the unknown in their lives, right? And so we have so much to learn from young kids, and that's the essence of that quote, and I guess the essence of the book, Julie.
Well, I love it. And I really love this conversation, and I can't believe it's over. It's like ridiculous how fast time passes in a talk with you. So I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming on and for being here with all of us. I know it's late at night there, but you know, it really made my day. So thank you so much. Really appreciate your wisdom and continued success. And I will look forward to the very next time we can just twist your arm to come back and talk with us again, because it's always great.
Julie, thank you so much. Honestly, it's been an honor. It's been an absolute pleasure for me. And I hope it's not long before I'm able to fly back over to your side of the world and see you all.
The Slate School, we would love to have you. We would love.
I would be delighted. I'd love to see what you're getting up to. And to everyone that's given up their time this evening, this afternoon, wherever you are in the world this morning, to be with us. Thank you all so, so much. Julie, it's been an absolute privilege. Thank you.
Ditto to that. And thank you to all for coming on. And I will end this conversation like we end all of the conversations on the Idea Lab, just by saying to everybody there, hope you're doing well, and we'll send positive rice to everybody. Positive rice, Richard. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.